Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start a news bulletin from Italy, where nearly 900 new coronavirus fatalities have taken the country's death toll to over 10,000. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has ruled out a quarantine in any part of the country, even after the national death toll topped 2,100. Worldwide, the number of confirmed cases has jumped to over 664,000, with nearly 31,000 deaths. This report has the details.
The coronavirus pandemic keeps its stronghold on the world as New Zealand and Qatar reported their first deaths, but US President Donald Trump says quarantining New York will not be necessary. Calling Trump's decision preposterous, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said the US has been behind this virus from day one.
We have been behind this virus from day one. We have been in a reactive posture from day one with this virus. We're waiting to see what the virus does, and then we're responding. The virus makes another move, and then we respond. No, you don't win on defense. You win on offense. You have to get ahead of this, anticipate what's going to happen.
Russia will close all border crossings from tomorrow after reporting 270 new cases, with a total of 1,534 patients under treatment. The World Health Organization says coronavirus has now spread to dozens of the 47 countries in Africa, with 2650 infected and 49 dead. Meanwhile, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has told all non-essential workers to stay at home for 2 more weeks, after fatalities rose by a record 832 people overnight to 5,690, overwhelming hospitals and morgues.
This is a crisis that affects all countries, and therefore it is not asymmetrical. It is symmetrical. It affects all countries. It does not obey borders. It does not distinguish between past economic policies made by one country or another. The response cannot be national. It must be a European response. It has to be a response where we all row as one, whether we are Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian or German. It has to be a European response.
Meanwhile, Canadian First Lady Sophie Gregoire Trudeau has fully recovered after contracting COVID-19.
In India, the crisis of migrant workers movement has deepened due to the complete curfew and lockdown across the country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a 21-day-long sudden curfew on March the 23rd amid coronavirus pandemic. Thousands of migrant men and women gathered at New Delhi's bus terminal in an effort to reach their homes. Officials say these huge gatherings and groups walking on highways towards their hometowns may lead to a jump in the infections. Meanwhile, a 38-year-old man who walked over 200 kilometers from Delhi to reach his home in Madhya died on the way. The Indian Health Ministry has recorded almost 1,000 infections from the virus, with 21 deaths across the country. Moving on to Pakistan, where 28 people have so far recovered from the deadly COVID-19 as the country battles with the pandemic. Ministry of Health has reported total 13 deaths across the country as 1 patient died in the last 24 hours. New coronavirus infections across Pakistan have reached over 1,500 after provinces restricted the movement of the citizens. Ministry of Health Services said 31 new cases were reported in the past 24 hours, while 11 patients are critical. The data shows 481 infections in Sindh, 558 in Punjab, 138 in Balochistan, 188 in KP, 116 in Gilgit-Baltistan, and 43 in capital Islamabad. Earlier, the government announced the country's eastern and the western borders will remain closed for 2 more weeks. Meanwhile, another special plane of China carrying medical supplies has arrived at Islamabad airport. The Afghan government says prisoner release with the Taliban will only start after the beginning of intra-Afghan talks. At a press conference in Kabul, President Ashraf Ghani's spokesperson Wahid Umar said the Taliban should not make excuses to avoid the dialogue. He said the Taliban are deliberately creating hurdles for the talks by raising objection to Kabul's negotiating team. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo lauded the Afghan government's team for talks with the Taliban as inclusive. In a tweet, the U.S. Secretary of State urged politicians to show the same commitment to form an inclusive government. Meanwhile, the Taliban announced a 10-member team headed by Mallawi Ziauddin to hold talks with Kabul. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said efforts are underway for the team's travel to Bagram for a quick start to the prisoner release process. The EU has called for an immediate ceasefire in Syria to deal with the novel coronavirus. In a statement, EU spokesman Peter Stano said Idlib is vulnerable to the virus because of the large number of displaced people. He said the warring sides must end hostilities to protect the already struggling population. The UN has also called for a nationwide ceasefire as the country reported its first coronavirus case earlier this week. Syria has been in a state of civil war since early 2011 when the regime cracked down on the pro-democracy protests. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed and more than 10 million others displaced in the past 9 years, according to the UN officials. Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted 2 ballistic missiles fired by Houthis over capital Riyadh and the southern Jizan city. Yemen's Saudi-led coalition spokesperson Colonel Turki al-Maliki says no deaths have been recorded so far. Al-Maliki said debris of the neutralized missiles fell on residential areas in both the cities. He said this escalation by Houthi militia reflects they do not want a ceasefire and de-escalation. Saudi state-run media said US Patriot missile defense systems were used in the interception. Houthi rebels claim the missiles were fired by the air defenses to repel a formation of the coalition warplanes attacking Sana'a. North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast into the Japan Sea. Japan's defense ministry says the missiles did not land in Japanese territory or its exclusive economic zone. South Korea called for an immediate halt to the tests, terming the launches inappropriate amid the global fight against COVID-19. The launch is believed to be the North's 4th major weapons test this year. After a long pause in missile testing, North Korea has ramped up. North Korea has ramped up its program in the past month. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has warned that the North is developing a new strategic weapon to be unveiled this year. Malians are voting in long-delayed parliamentary elections hours after the country recorded its first coronavirus death. This comes after the abduction of the leading opposition figure who is believed to be in the hands of the militants. The government says there were security fears about the vote even before the war-torn West African country recorded its first coronavirus infection. It says some 200,000 people displaced by the daily violence in the center and north will not be able to vote. The poll will elect new MPs to the 147-seat National Assembly for the first time since 2013. A second round of the polls is scheduled for April the 19th. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has welcomed European Union's decision to open accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. Secretary-General spokesperson said Guterres congratulated the governments and the people of the 2 countries on achieving this important milestone. Guterres encouraged sustained efforts to implement national reforms, including those toward the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. North Macedonia has recently become a NATO member after it resolved a long-standing name dispute with Greece. In a letter being sent to every household in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned that the coronavirus crisis will get worse before it gets better. The number of deaths in the United Kingdom has now jumped to over 1,000 after 260 more fatalities in the past 24 hours. Johnson, who is self-isolating after testing positive for the COVID-19, says stricter restrictions could be put in place if necessary. Calling it a national emergency, Johnson urged people to follow government guidance to stay at home and avoid putting pressure on the National Health Services. When National Health Services Director Stephen Powers said the UK will have done well if coronavirus deaths remain less than 20,000.
But as Sir Patrick Vallance, I think the Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, said recently, if we can keep deaths below 20,000, we will have done very well in this epidemic. It's early at the moment, and the scientists who are working with government to model what we can expect are, of course, adjusting their predictions.
A group of 3D printer owners in the United Kingdom, known as 3D Crowd, have joined forces to create desperately needed face shields. These are for medical staff who are battling with the equipment shortages during the coronavirus pandemic. More on this report.
3D printer owners across Britain have teamed up to produce thousands of face visors to protect medical workers from being infected with coronavirus. The masks are fairly easy to assemble. Once the printers have created the headband, a plastic film is placed on the front and elastic attached the back to hold it in place. Companies across the UK have been offering their premises as assembly and distribution hubs for the shields.
Where we're basically getting all the people around the country who have 3D printers, we're enlisting them in our project to create face shields for the NHS. They're in desperate need and they've been contacting us every day.
The design for the mask was supplied by Joseph Prusa, a 3D printer based in the Czech Republic.
We got thousands of people signed up to produce these things. So it's a very quick, fast, cost-effective way to get protective gear into the hands of our NHS workers.
Thousands of 3D printing face shields are due to be delivered to hospitals around Britain in the coming weeks.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The Cuban medical mission has rejected U.S. criticism against its doctors. Cuba has sent medical brigades to a host of countries to fight the novel coronavirus pandemic. Cuba has the highest ratio of the doctors per capita worldwide and offers the services of its army of white robes. The services are free for some countries, while others pay for the doctors, which makes them Cuba's largest source of hard currency. Earlier this week, the U.S. State Department said Cuba was exploiting medical missions to make money. The head of Cuban Medical Cooperation, Jorge Delgado, said the world turns to Cuba when it requires professional medical services.
When there is a problem, who do they look for in many places? Cuba. Who did they look for with Ebola? To Cuba. To go to give direct medical attention to patients who died. To Cuba. Someone will have given money, but the one who provided the high-quality professional human resources was Cuba. And those who are the slaves, the ones who send them to save lives? Which slaves save lives in the world? They are people who go spontaneously and voluntarily to fulfill mission.
Con personas que van espontáneas.
Over 400 tourists from Europe and Asia have left Bolivia for their home countries. The stranded tourists from France, Italy, Belgium, Korea and the US left La Paz after obtaining special permits. Last week, the South American country closed its borders and halted international air travel amid the novel coronavirus pandemic. French envoy to Bolivia, Denis Gaillard, said European tourists boarded a direct flight to Paris arranged in coordination with the European Union. The embassy said a second flight is scheduled for next week.
The first and second flights are intended to bring French and European tourists who have been stranded in Bolivia, in places like Uyuni, Copacabana and Cochabamba, to bring them to La Paz and Santa Cruz and afterwards let them leave for Europe.
In the U.S., 6 people have been injured in a tornado that ripped through the city of Jonesboro in Arkansas State. The Jonesboro mayor has ordered a curfew in the city located about 209 kilometers northeast of Little Rock. National Weather Service said the twister ripped through the city, housing Little Rock. National Weather Service said the twister ripped through the city, housing 75,000 people. The Jonesboro police chief said a rescue crews made 3 sweeps looking for anyone in need of assistance before focusing on cleanup. Authorities said the tornado wrecked the buildings and flipped the cars, while the local airport reported one turned-over airplane and damaged hangars. Arkansas Governor Tom Cotton tweeted he was closely monitoring the situation and the state government was ready to assist the people. The new coronavirus pandemic has affected medical staff more than any other profession as they are risking their lives to save the rest. South Africa's health minister says 13 new cases of COVID-19 in the past 24 hours are all health workers. Amid the outbreak, 9 doctors in the Philippines, 1 in Pakistan, and 40 in Italy have died from the virus. In China, 3 doctors succumbed to death, while over 300 medical staff tested positive for the coronavirus. People in China, Pakistan, Italy, and the US have lauded the hard work and sacrifices of the health workers with gestures of appreciation. In Lebanon, hospitals fighting coronavirus outbreak have either turned away undocumented people or are setting prohibitively high costs for the tests. Witnesses say hospitals are turning away those without documents so long as they were not in need of emergency care. Most migrant domestic workers in Lebanon are left without documents when they escape abusive employers. About 250,000 undocumented domestic workers reside in Lebanon. Japan has criticized the head of the World Health Organization, accusing him of being incapable of managing the ongoing coronavirus crisis. Speaking in Tokyo, Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso slammed Tedros Ghebreyesus for his inadequate evaluation of the initial outbreak in China. He also noted an online petition signed by 635,000 people so far, demanding the resignation of Tedros. More than 1,600 cases of infection have been confirmed in the country, excluding 712 cases from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. 52 people have died, excluding 10 from the cruise ship. South Korean COVID-19 test kit manufacturer I1 Bio says it is swamped by orders from North America and Europe. The company adds it has 40,000 test kits ready for shipping, an amount that could be used to test 2 million individuals. This report has the details.
After Seoul's successful containment of the coronavirus, testing kits manufactured in the country have become a major export. 47 countries have reached out to South Korea asking to import COVID-19 diagnostic tools. Another 39 nations have requested them as humanitarian aid. The only problem is keeping up with the orders.
We are waiting for approvals of clinical tests from the United States, Italy, Switzerland and Mexico. And once we get green lights, we will ship off at least 40,000 test kits, amount that can run 2 million tests to those countries. Some countries also requested the kits without clinical tests. We expect the demand of our kits will be more than 5 million tests.
Biotech startup I1 Bio is just one of several companies mass-producing COVID-19 testing kits in South Korea. Despite having plenty of local competition, I1 Bio employees are regularly working overtime to keep up with the orders.
I left the office after midnight yesterday because they are in different time zones. My staff and I were working all night at home and here these days.
The US is one of South Korea's biggest customers for COVID-19 test kits. This includes both FDA-approved kits along with others approved by state governments. Demand for kits is expected to rise even further in the US over the coming weeks as coronavirus cases peak in the country. After South Korea, China is the biggest exporter of COVID-19 test kits.
Italy has approved a new package to help those worst hit by the coronavirus crisis. This includes supplying shopping vouchers and food packages. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says $4.8 billion will be readily available for mayors to deal with their citizens' needs.
Italy criticized President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen for dismissing the need for issuing common debt by EU countries. But von der Leyen says the bloc will put forward a new stimulus package to help by proposing changes in its long-term budget. Meanwhile, South Korea says it will supply disaster relief funds to low-income households to counter the economic fallout from the pandemic. The finance ministry says 4-member households can receive up to $800 worth of vouchers under the plan. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe promised an unprecedented package of steps to cushion the world's third biggest economy from the pandemic. Abe said size of the package will exceed the amount used in response to the 2008 global financial crisis, which was worth $528 billion.
Russia's largest oil producer, Rosneft, has ended its operations in Venezuela. A Rosneft spokesperson says the decision was taken to protect the company's shareholders. Rosneft also sold its Venezuelan assets to an unnamed company owned by the Russian government. In recent months, the U.S. sanctioned Rosneft's 2 Swiss-based units, alleging the oil giant transported and sold Venezuela's crude oil on its behalf. The change of ownership means any similar U.S. sanctions will target the Russian government directly. Both Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and the Russian ambassador in Caracas have vowed to continue mutual cooperation. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department is yet to issue a response to this development. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.